The desert at night is not just empty land. It is a place of loneliness, of memory, of quiet echoes that seem to come from long ago. The wind drifts across the dunes like a sigh, carrying with it the weight of everything the desert has witnessed. Above, the stars shine brighter than anywhere else on Earth, cold, sharp, eternal. They look down as if they are keeping secrets. Secrets too heavy for the human heart to bear. And yet, the silence of the desert is never truly silent. Beneath the stillness, there are whispers. Whispers of things that fell from the sky. Whispers of lights that moved with intelligence, as if searching for something or someone. Whispers of people who stumbled upon the unexplainable and carried those memories like a burden for the rest of their lives. The desert is beautiful, but it is unforgiving. It holds what it chooses to hold. Some of its treasures are ancient fossils and forgotten ruins. Others are stranger metallic fragments, burned soil, and stories of beings that did not belong here. For those who live on its edges, the desert is home. But for those who have seen its hidden side, it is something else entirely. A place of fear, a place of awe, a place where the ordinary world dissolves, and you are left staring into the unknown. This is not just the story of landscapes and sand. It is the story of people, ordinary men and women whose lives were shaken by what they saw in the desert sky. Some were terrified. Some were changed forever. Some tried to forget. Tonight, as you let your body rest and your mind drift, you will step into their footsteps. You will feel the chill of the desert night, hear the faint hum in the distance, and stand beneath the same stars that have seen everything. The desert was quiet that night, the kind of silence that presses against your chest, where even the sound of your own breathing feels too loud. Ranchers were tending their cattle, soldiers were stationed at remote outposts, and families were gathered in small towns, scattered across the endless horizon. Life was simple, predictable, safe, and then the light appeared. At first, it seemed like nothing more than a star, little brighter than the rest, a little larger. But then it moved, smoothly, purposefully, not like a falling meteor with its blazing tail, not like a plane with its steady path, but with a grace that felt deliberate, as though something alive was guiding it. People stepped out of their homes and looked upward, squinting into the night sky. Some gasped. Some called for neighbors. Children clung to their parents' arms. There was something beautiful about the way it glided, but there was also something terrifying. Witnesses would later say the air itself felt different, as if the desert was holding its breath. Dogs barked in the distance, restless and afraid. Horses shifted nervously in their pens. The light hovered, then darted left, then right, then suddenly straight up. No sound, no roar of engines, just silence. One woman would never forget the way her father whispered under his breath, "That's not from here." His voice shook, not from certainty, but from a deep, human instinct that he was witnessing something impossible. And then, without warning, the light grew brighter, so bright it illuminated the sands below, casting long, eerie shadows across the desert floor. For a moment, the night looked like day, and every grain of sand seemed to glow. People shielded their eyes, their hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and awe, and just as suddenly as it had come, the light streaked across the horizon and vanished behind the distant mountains. The desert fell silent once more, but the silence was no longer comforting. It was heavy, charged. Every witness that night felt it that something had happened, something extraordinary, something that could not be explained. For some, it was just a strange sight in the sky, a mystery to be laughed about over coffee the next morning. But for others, it was the beginning of an obsession, a memory that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. It had rolled in, out of the horizon, the sort that comes in without warning. Lightning flashed in the distance, fleetingly catching sight of jagged shapes of mesas and isolated shrubs. The atmosphere was filled with a whiff of dust and electricity. For dwellers on wasteland peripheries, there was something uncomfortable in the night. And so it came to pass. A bolt of light ripped across the clouds, more intense than the storm itself. Eyewitnesses said it was a fireball, but one that traveled with peculiar purpose. It darted through the sky as if struggling to hold back gravity, before abruptly dropping towards Earth in a secluded ranch, away from the villages. A man named Elias was stirred up by the shuddering of his windows violently. His horses whinnied in terror. The cattle pushed against the fences, eyes bulging with fear. As Elias ventured outside, he spotted something race by and disappear over the hills, accompanied by a low, thunderless rumble. The desert glowed for one brief moment, and then darkness came back. But the silence that came after did not feel right. Heavy, as if the earth itself had seen something it wasn't supposed to see. The following morning, Elias rode out in the direction he believed the object had dropped. The desert went on forever before him, a sea of brush and sand. And then, just between places, he saw it. The earth was charred, the ground blackened, as if a huge fire had raged across. Unnatural fragments lay on the sand, bits of metal, some as thin as paper, others hard and brittle, like glass. They glinted in the sun, their edges glowing dully, as if they still lived. Elias got down from his horse and stooped. He picked up a sample, no bigger than his palm. It was as light as a feather, much lighter than aluminum. When he attempted to bend it, it defied. When he dropped it, it did not dent. When he held it up to the light, faint designs, like etched hieroglyphs, appeared to shine through. Fear occurred in his chest, but so did awe. He stuck the piece of the plane into his pocket and surveyed the area. The wreckage stretched out before him, further than he could see. Debris scattered like breadcrumbs into the desert. But he was not alone. Far away, shadowy forms emerged, trucks grinding over the sands. Men in uniforms, alighting with deliberation. Elias stood still. They were too distant to discern him in detail, but he knew intuitively that whatever he had discovered was not to be touched, not to be seen, and he had seen it. He had touched it, and in that instant, Elias came to an understanding that would haunt him for the rest of his life. What had dropped from the sky that evening was otherworldly. The desert was not eager to reveal its secrets, but the men in uniforms were even more so by the next day. When Elias returned to the crash site, things had been altered. The debris that had scattered about the area was now neatly stacked in piles. The charred earth was being roped off, and guards armed with machine guns stood like specters beside the blinding sunlight. Trucks that clogged the ridge had tarps draped across their beds, concealing whatever was being stashed within. The men did not have any names on their uniforms, no insignias that could be read. They went about in hushed silence, talking only as much as they needed to, their gaze always on the horizon. It was obvious they were not here to inquire. They were here to erase. Elias stood off in the distance, his heart racing. He had not said a word about the piece he had stolen the previous night. It felt heavy against his thigh now, though it hardly weighed anything at all. Part of him wished to toss it back into the sand, to shed the secret. But another part, defiant, curious, would not release it. That evening, news traveled quietly along the surrounding towns. Farmers spoke in hushed tones of truck convoys driving west. One storekeeper took an oath that he spotted crates being loaded onto aircraft at midnight. Families spoke in hushed tones of men going door to door, querying, warning them to remain silent. For others, it was sufficient to instill fear. They dropped their gazes, quieted their voices, and continued their lives. But others experienced something else. A stirring within, a sense that something remarkable had touched against their desert existence. In the meantime, Elias sat in his tiny dwelling, the anomalous piece spread out on the table in front of him. He gazed at it by candlelight, following the faint markings inscribed onto its surface. They appeared to change as the light shifted, hieroglyphs that were both hauntingly familiar and entirely otherworldly. He pressed the piece again and again, hoping it would shatter, warp, be revealed as mundane, but it refused to. A knock at the door shattered the silence. Elias froze. He had been expecting this, and dreading it. Slowly, he rose, his hand trembling as he reached for the latch. Outside stood two men in uniform. Their faces were expressionless, their eyes sharp. "Evening, sir," one of them said calmly. "We're here on official business. We've been told something unusual may have been found near your property." The other man tilted his head, his gaze lingering on Elias longer than was comfortable. "If you've seen anything," he added softly, "it would be best for everyone if you handed it over." At that point, Elias experienced a shiver beyond the night of the desert. He recognized the item on his desk was greater than metal, greater than enigma, greater than something that should be in human fingers. It was a key, something that wasn't supposed to be held by man, and now, the men in suits were there to reclaim it. The desert gust shook Elias's little house shutters as the two men entered without invitation. Their boots pounded on the wooden floor, their footsteps heavy, like storm clouds in a room that was too small to hold them. The piece sat upon the table, revealed by the lamplight, radiating weakly as if it knew what was to occur. One of the men stopped and looked down at it. For an instant, Elias believed he detected a flash of recognition in the soldier's eyes, fear and wonder. The same things which had caused Elias to lie awake every night since its discovery. "This is ours," the man said flatly, reaching out with a gloved hand. Elias's throat constricted. All his instincts were crying at him to make them halt, to defend the foreign relic that had selected him. But his voice stuck in his chest. He could do nothing but stand there as the man picked it up from the table. And then something strange occurred. As soon as the fragment flew off the table, the light in the room appeared to warp. Shadows grew long, lamplight danced, and a deep hum thrummed through the air, unsettling and low. The soldiers stood still, sharing a look that betrayed for the first time their nervousness. "What is this thing?" one of them whispered, but Elias had no reply. He knew only the truth in his bones. This was not mere trash. This was alive in some manner that human brains couldn't process. The man who was holding it jammed the fragment into a black case, clamping it shut. The hum stopped at once, leaving a silence so dense it seemed to press down on the air. "This never happened," the soldier told him, his voice cold, his gaze piercing Elias's. "Forget you saw anything, for your own sake, and for all that you love." They departed in haste, their truck vanishing into the darkness of the desert. The dust they raised hung behind them long after the sound of their engine was gone. Elias was by himself in the quiet, gazing into the vacant spot on the table. His hands shook, not only from terror, but from sorrow. He had lost something he could not define, something which had left him in awe and fear simultaneously. But at the back of his mind, there was still one truth. They had stolen the fragment, yes, but they had not stolen the memory. They could destroy evidence, muffle witnesses, and hide secrets under the sand. But they could never destroy what he had sensed in that instant, a bond. The otherworldly presence speaking through a piece of metal, not crafted by human hands, and sitting there that evening by himself. Elias understood this. Whatever had come crashing through the desert was not forgotten. It was still out there, buried, concealed, waiting, and its tale was far from over. Elias attempted to go back to normal, but everything was different. The fields seemed more barren, the stars more weighty with secrets. Every evening he gazed out to the horizon, wondering what had crashed there and why it was being kept from the public. At first he had imagined it. The flash of headlights too distant to be a neighbor, a vehicle parked with its lights disabled on the road just outside his house. The quiet roar of engines fading in the distance hours past midnight. They were observing him. The uniformed men had taken the piece of him, but they had not released him. He sensed their gaze everywhere, at the well, at the market, in the stillness of the desert when the wind died. Occasionally, he believed that he saw movement against the ridges, as if there was always someone waiting, always listening. One evening, not being able to sleep, Elias sat outside with his lantern turned low. The desert stretched out endlessly in front of him, quiet except for the hush of a single cricket. And then he saw it out on the horizon, where the mountains devoured the moon. A glowing light, surging and ebbing, like a heartbeat. It wasn't a star. It wasn't a lantern. It glowed with the same beat he had known from the fragment. The same hum he felt in his chest on that night in his cabin. His breath stalled. Was it another wreck? Or was it something seeking what was lost? The following morning, when Elias strolled into town, he heard the murmurs. There was a rancher who affirmed that his cattle had run off at night, frightened by lights in the hills. A woman insisted she saw figures passing through her field, yet no footprints were left behind. Elias remained quiet, but in his heart he knew whatever had crashed in the desert had not been alone. That evening, when he returned home, he found something strange on his doorstep. A small envelope, unmarked, sealed tight. His hand shook as he opened it. Inside was a single scrap of paper, with a message written in hurried, uneven handwriting. You are not alone. Do not trust them. The desert remembers. Elias's heart thudded. It wasn't signed, but he knew right away. Someone had watched what he had. Someone had seen the truth. The observers in darkness weren't just the men in uniform. There were others silent, concealed, waiting for someone to put the pieces together. And for the first time since the shard was stolen, Elias felt a spark of hope. The letter remained concealed in Elias's pocket for days. He reread it repeatedly, following the trembling script with his calloused hands. You are not alone. Do not trust them. The desert remembers. It was a warning and a comfort. For so long, Elias had been consumed by silence, believing what he saw was his alone to bear. Now, he realized there were others who bore the same load of memory, the same terror of speaking too loudly. He went out into the desert that night, led by instinct and moonlight alone. The sand crunched softly under his boots, and the cold of the night air clung to his flesh. And as he moved, he spoke into the empty silence. Who are you? What do you want me to see? The desert did not reply, in words, but it spoke in signs. He stood on the bank of a dry creek bed, one he hadn't seen since boyhood. Scattered on the dust before him were tracksawed shallow impressions in the ground. Not boots, not hooves, not paws. Round and almost delicate, as if something light had passed over the surface and just touched down. He knelt, running his fingers over the marks, and once more sensed the light hum in his chest. The same hum as the peace, the same pulse he had witnessed shining past the mountains. As he followed the marks, he saw the tracks weren't random. They were a trail, twisting through the desert, as if to some destination. And although his breathing became shallow, and his heart pounded, he trailed on. The paths took him to a grove of Joshua trees, the knotted trunks reaching for the stars like bony fingers. And there, in the roots, something reflected the moonlight. Another fragment. This one was smaller, jagged, as if snapped from the larger one he had once secreted in his cabin. When he picked it up, the hum came back, louder than before, vibrating up his arm, flooding his head with heat and whispers he couldn't quite make out. He stumbled backward, holding it to his chest. Why was it lying here, so near, so unprotected? Unless the desert itself had selected him. Elias knelt, his eyes burning with tears. It wasn't just his imagination. He hadn't gone crazy. The mystery existed, was alive, and somehow it came back to him. But with the peace came fear. If the men in uniform knew about the first piece, then they would be seeking the others. Then they would come back, and Elias realized something with cold horror. The desert was witness to all, but it didn't remain silent long enough. Elias didn't come home that night. He couldn't. The fragment seared like a secret in his pocket, and all his instincts screamed that the watchers were out there. Circling Dot, so he ascended to the crest of a rocky ridge, where he could gaze out across the desert for miles. shining under the moon like silver. He constructed a small fire, not for heat, but for nerve, and sat with the fragment in his hand. The desert was quiet, but not vacant. He sensed it now, the hum of the land itself, as if the earth bore a memory that no one could ever take away. And within that quiet, the fragment started glowing softly, beating with the rhythm of his heartbeat. Elias shut his eyes. There was darkness at first. Then, soft whispers crept into his mind. Not words, but impressions, half-remembered dreams. Shapes passing over boundless skies. Entities not confined by feet, but by flows of light. A world beyond his own, strange and heartbreakingly lovely. And then, an image, clean and precise. The crash, the firelit sand. A vehicle, not of this world, tumbling as it crashed. Fragments spilling down the desert, and Boda small, delicate, unrecognizable, moving through the debris. The apparition flashed no more than seconds, but left Elias shaking, his breathing jagged dot. He opened his eyes to the night sky, and for the first time, he felt the magnitude of what he had with him. This wasn't wreckage alone. This wasn't metal alone. This was a tale of another world, entombed in secrecy, veiled by fear. Tears streamed down his face, not of fear, but of a grief he couldn't identify. If the creatures in his dream were real, if they had died here, they hadn't come as conquerors. They had come as strangers, lost and shattered in a world that would not accept them. The fire popped quietly, shooting sparks into the heavens. Elias gazed upwards, mouthing to the stars, "Why me?" There was no reply, only the wind of the desert, twisting round him, bearing the faintest whisper of the whispers he had heard as darkness fell. Elias was certain of one thing. He was no longer merely a witness. He had been appointed a keeper of the truth. Keepers are never safe. Somewhere outside the reach of the firelight, a pair of eyes observed him. The flames had flickered down to a low embers, their light struggling to hold off the immense darkness of the night desert. Elias remained motionless, holding the shard, when he felt it, the unmistakable presence of being observed. At first he believed it was just the men in uniform. Maybe they had tracked him down, standing back until he fell. But as the minutes ticked away, he noticed that this regard was not as it seemed. It was not loaded with suspicion, or keen with human purpose. It was gentler, more interested, almost patient. The hairs on his arms stood on end. Gradually, he turned to face the ridge below. Two soft glows floated in the darkness. Not lanterns, not flashlights. Circular, glowing softly, casting the dying embers of the fire back at him. They didn't blink. They didn't stir. They simply observed. Elias's breath was frozen. His body reacted to flee, but something primal, something ancient, impelled him to remain. The piece in his pocket buzzed. A low thrum filled his chest, and for an instant, the night seemed to be alive with connection. He recalled the vision, the crash, the delicate creatures, the sorrow carved into the quiet. "Is it you?" he whispered, his voice shaking. "Are you what I have seen?" The eyes flashed once, as if in response. Then they disappeared into the black. No step, no brush of leaves, no noise at all, only silence, heavy and unending. Elias leaned forward, his heart pounding. He wasn't certain if he'd glimpsed something solid or if his fatigue had transformed the night into delusions. But the vibration in his chest was continuous, reassuring. He wasn't alone. At dawn, when the desert was bathed in gold and crimson, Elias descended from the ridge. His fire was reduced to ash, but the recollection of the eyes remained like an ember that still glowed in him. Back in town, life went on as if nothing had changed. The shopkeepers haggled, children ran in the dust, ranchers argued over water rights. But Elias carried a secret none of them could see. He knew the desert was keeping something alive, and whatever it was, it had discovered him. Elias hardly had time to think about what he'd seen on the ridge before the quietness of his world broke open once more. It was noon when they arrived. 2 black vehicles, their engines rumbling low as they drove into the little desert town. Dust followed them like shadows. The locals paused in what they were doing, their faces uneasy as they watched the cars pull to a stop at the side of the main street. The men emerged in twos, the same sort Elias had recalled from that evening months before. Dark uniforms, shiny boots, faces impassive under their hats. They drew the warmth from the air. This time, they didn't arrive quietly. They marched right into the center of town, knocking on doors, inquiring. Elias observed from afar, concealed behind the wooden beams of the general store. Each step they made seemed a countdown by night. One of them located him, Elias Navarro. The tone was crisp, abrupt, like a knife cutting through stagnant water. He swallowed hard, answering with his head, "You have to come with us." His neighbors feigned ignorance as he was taken back to the black vehicles. He sat in the rear seat, the door banging behind him, trapping him inside. The engine revved, and the car moved off, the town dwindling to a tiny size in the back window. They didn't take him far. Beyond the mountains, out on the dry flats, was a group of temporary buildings from which sprouted tents, trailers, antennas reaching toward the sky. It wasn't there last time. They had constructed it, in haste, in secret. In one of the trailers, Elias sat at a metal desk. In front of him, a man in a suit, not a soldier, but one higher, colder. His eyes never relaxed, not even when he greeted him. "Something you've been holding," the man stated matter-of-factly. "Bits of something that isn't yours. We have the piece. We know you've been in the desert." Elias attempted to regulate his breathing. His hand involuntarily jerked toward the pocket, where the new piece still lay, concealed. "I don't know what you're referring to," he told him, even as his voice betrayed him. The man shifted forward, his voice softening, so close to being cruel. "Do you know what you've gotten yourself into? This isn't myth, Navarro. This isn't a children's bedtime story. This is United States government property. And if you don't cease running from ghosts, you'll find yourself gone into the desert too." Elias's throat constricted, but under the fear, something else emerged, silent defiance. He recalled the watching eyes, the hushed whispers under the stars, the anguish of the not-from-here beings. They weren't pieces. They weren't wreckage. They were lives. He looked at the man, and, finally, he did not avert his eyes. The man in the suit glared across the table, his silence weighing more than words. Elias felt trapped, as though caught in a hunter's snare. The fragment of the hum lingered against his thigh from within his pocket, reminding him that he was not yet without power. "You have 2 options," the man finally spoke. "You can just forget what you've seen, live your life, get old and quiet. Or," he let the silence linger, "you can just continue to pursue this dream. And if you do take that route, I guarantee you, Navarro, you won't enjoy where it's headed." The words hung suspended in the air like a verdict, handed down in court. Elias's heart was racing. He could lie, submit, and maybe be spared. Even if he lived till he was an old man, though, he would bear the burden of silence. The unbearable memory that the truth was gone for good. The desert whispered in his mind. The desert remembers. He swallowed hard. "I didn't ask to see it," he whispered, his voice shaking. "I didn't ask for any of this, but I can't forget what I've seen, and you can't make me." The man's jaw clenched. His sharp, cold eyes did not blink. Then he reclined in his chair, interlacing his hands. "Then we'll ensure that no one takes you seriously." The words cut more painfully than threats of violence. To be deleted, not violently, but through doubt. To be reduced to a fool, a lunatic, a drunkard, telling tales in the corner of a saloon. That was the penalty they imposed on him. Elias was led out of the trailer and left at the outskirts of town as dawn was just breaking. The cars disappeared in a cloud of dust, and he was left by himself with the silence. For a long time, he remained sitting on the parched ground, gazing at the distance. The sun rose slowly, illuminating the desert in red and yellow. The world seemed no different, normal, as if nothing could have occurred. But within, Elias was not the same. He had been presented with an option, and at that time, he knew what he would do. The uniformed men might bury evidence. They might destroy records. They might deny him, but they could not take away what he had seen, what he had felt, what the desert itself had attested to. Elias would not permit the story to die, even if his voice was the only one remaining to say it. The subsequent days were still, but not the tranquility Elias yearned for. It was the silence of being observed, the silence of knowing too much. The townspeople treated him gently, but some had already started to regard him differently, suspiciously in their gaze, as if whispers had already begun. The uniformed men had fulfilled their promise. They hadn't silenced him with bullets. They poisoned him with uncertainty. Yet, Elias kept the fragment near his heart. In the evenings, when the desert winds screamed and the stars twinkled like 1,000 eyes watching, he would sit outside and cup it in his hand. The buzz calmed him, a song from another universe, reminding him that he wasn't alone. At times, the visions recurred. He would see the crash, the blaze in the sand, the vulnerable creatures who had perished here. He would sense their grief, their loss, yet also their hope, a soft faith that their tale would not be lost to the sand. Elias became their guardian. He never set it down, never believed in paper or pen. Instead, he whispered the tale, in the flicker of campfires, in the silence of desert nights. Passers-by who came through would recall the quiet man with haunted eyes. Speaking of lights in the sky and hidden things beneath the sands, most ignored him. Some laughed, but some heard, and hearing was enough. Because once spoken, stories never really die. Many years later, long past when the cars ceased to come and the uniforms no longer haunted the town, children would still congregate among the Joshua trees. They would sit beneath the starry sky, challenging one another to speak his name, Elias Navarro, the one who knew the desert's secrets. And when the wind bore eerie hums over the dunes, when cows shifted uneasily in the darkness, when lights wavered on the horizon, they recalled his words. The desert remembers. Elias died peacefully, his eyes closed under the same sky that had previously burned with flame. In his last gasp, he held the shard, still glowing softly in his hand. It had never left him. The desert preserved its secret, and somewhere out there, beyond the stars, perhaps the creatures who perished here were aware that their tale had not been lost, but born in the heart of a man who would not forget, and thus, the enigma endured, not in books, not in documents, but in the silence, the whispers, and the dreams of those who could look at the desert and believe.